Detractors and critics may say, well, Penn State must not be elite. It was only by a touchdown. It didn't really look that impressive. Find too many better wins in the country this season. It's difficult to do. And so the Buckeyes march on with a huge win in Happy Valley and prepare for the stretch drive in Indiana game in a few weeks and what appears to be a couple layups in the near future. Welcome into Buckeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by for the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. We've got these two on board. It's been a few times, 291 to be exact. Steve Hellwagon right next to me. Bucknell 247 Sports. Tony Gerdeman, of course. It's BuckeyeHuddle.com, and it's, of course, the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, daily with Tony. Guys, how we doing?
Doing well.
Good. So a number of people showed up for this ball game, I guess the most in the history of Penn State football, and they were denied once again. And James Franklin heard the backlash. And that's another topic. We can certainly get into that, but we'll talk Scarlet and Gray first and foremost. Steve, you've seen a few of these. Your impressions of the performance, which I found to be stellar for the most part, gritty, and that of a could-be champion.
Yeah, well, I didn't get to go. I tested positive for COVID on Friday, and Pat Murphy, who I work with, his fiance is a cancer nurse, and so we didn't feel like it was the right thing for me to ride in the car with him, possibly give it to her, and her maybe pass it on to one of her, at-risk patients. So I stayed back and watched it here with my wife, which was an experience unto itself as well. And, again, to go in there and fall behind 10-0, that's not exactly the blueprint that you would have wanted to see Ohio State go in the first 10 minutes of the game. I mean, that was just a miserable start for Ohio State, and Will Howard throws the pick six, and you're like, whoa, this isn't a good way to get this thing off the ground. But they came back and they scored 2 touchdowns in rapid fire succession and took the lead 14-10 and kind of stabilized things a little bit. And then, of course, got the interception at the goal line. Just an amazing, incredible play by Davis Enigbenosin. They're still ahead by 7 in the fourth quarter. Penn State with Tyler Warren ran it all the way down to the 3-yard line, the big tight end. And you're thinking, well, man, just give him the ball. Let him run it in. He's that good. They have a real tough time tackling him down there. They didn't do that. They gave the ball to Katron Allen 3 times, and he got as close as the 1-yard line. And then on 4th down, they tried another pass. And, Ohio State's pass defense was just amazing in this game, I think, from the coverage. Just enough of a pass rush to make Drew Aller think about things a little bit. It seemed at times in the balance of the game that he was just kind of throwing it up for grabs, it felt like at times. And so to me, I think the pass rush was okay. I don't think it was great, but obviously that 4th down pass goes incomplete. And then the coup de grace, the cherry on top of the sundae, Ohio State takes over on its own 1-yard line. They get 4 yards on a quarterback sneak on 1st down, and then just proceed to run the ball down Penn State's throat and take the final 5 minutes and 13 seconds off the clock, picked up 4 first downs, 58 yards in 10 plays before they kneeled on the ball there at the end. So one time, and that was it. So to me, this was a command performance by Ohio State on the road to beat the number 3 team, previously undefeated Penn State. And, perhaps the way Ohio State won that game on the road is part of the reason why we saw last night they got installed as the number 2 team in the college football playoff rankings ahead of Georgia, who is ahead of Ohio State in both the AP poll and the coaches poll. Oregon up, obviously number 1, but just a gritty performance that they had to have, that they absolutely had to have at that moment.
Yeah, the committee on the teleconference last night said overall it was a great loss at Oregon, 1 point down to the wire at the number 1 team. Great win on the road at Penn State, and they're just more consistent than Georgia this season, and that's why they went with the Buckeyes. But looking at that game, I came away from that game. The story for me was the offensive line and running the ball out in the fourth and keeping the ball for the final 5-12 or whatever it was, because that's not something we get to see from Ohio State or many teams. To be able to do that from the 1 yard line, you've got the student section behind you, like everything is against you. The defense knows you're running the ball, and you get 4 yards on that first down sneak. And I think Will Howard said yesterday, I believe it was Will Howard saying yesterday, like you could just look at Penn State and you saw like they didn't think they were going to be able to stop Ohio State. And you could see the same thing from Ohio State down on the sidelines for that game, for that drive, that all of the momentum, I don't know how, but all of the momentum there was with Ohio State running the ball, and they created their own momentum, and they imposed their will, which you love to see an offensive line do. And they did this with a brand new offensive line, a new left side of the offensive line, and an environment that is not easy to play. They did it with a silent count throughout the game, no procedure penalties, no holding. Like the offensive line wasn't perfect, but they operated, and the operations of the entire outfit were very good and sound and solid. And you see Carson Hinsman out there having the time of his life on that final drive, and everybody after the game congratulating him, congratulating Donovan Jackson, because Donovan Jackson, they helped him out on an awful lot in this game with tight ends and running backs, but they did kind of hang him out to dry a couple of times against a very good pass rusher. But he's going to get better because of that. And they asked quite a bit from him, and he delivered for the most part, graded out a champion, as we know. So coming out of here with that game, the way the offensive line played, compare that to the feelings a week earlier, and now it's like, well, like for Buckeye fans, it is okay to hope again, basically, after watching this offensive line and running for what they did against Penn State. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting better. And I think you have to be pleased. You have to be encouraged with what you've seen from that offensive line. And then defensively, just the continued implementation of more of what Jim Knowles wants to do and has been empowered to do with some of the blitzing and some of the odd fronts that they're doing. He's strange to say he has more control now over the defense than maybe he has in the past, which, it's only year 3 and he's been your defensive coordinator. But Ryan Day has kind of insisted seemingly to, okay, let's ramp things up here, because you've got the secondary to cover up some mistakes. And we saw that, and not even mistakes, but that final play for Penn State, you have to defend the run, but immediately as the ball is snapped, Lathan Ransom covers up Tyler Warren, Caleb Downs drops back to defend Khalil Dinkins, the other tight end, and they covered it perfectly. And when you've got two guys like that have big brains and the athleticism to cover ground, like you can do more in front of them, and I think you're going to continue to see that. Mark, you muted.
I'll just underline the offensive line. Yeah, the 10 plays, 58 yards, 5.8 yards per carry, and that was consistent with the rest of the game. To have those two backs average 6 yards per carry against that defensive front, and again, when everybody in the building and everyone on TV knows that you're going to run the ball to try to use up the entire clock, and you're facing a front that is supposed to be miles better than the one you faced the week before, and by all indications, other indications, it is. That's tough to do. That is tough to do, and that's just execution, will, just girth and might and power up front to get that done, and explosiveness by the backs to just hit those holes and do it explosively. Is just, the whole thing was just a thing of beauty. If you love hard-nosed football and execution and dominance up front, it was a thing of beauty to run out the clock. Absolutely. Great stuff. All right. Will Howard gave up one at the goal line. Of course, he was going in for the touchdown, much controversy until it was reviewed, and I think it was pretty obvious. And then obviously gave away 6 right out of the gate, as Steve outlined. So how would you guys, Steve, grade Will Howard's performance?
Well, in terms of winning, an A. In terms of overall, I'd say a B+. I mean, he's got the moxie, he's got the confidence, he's got the toughness, he's got the physicality, he's got all those traits that you love. But I think the recurring theme that we are getting from Will Howard every week is you're going to have to live and put up with a couple of galactically colossal mistakes, whatever they may be. It could be a fumble, it could be a bad pick, it could be a bad pick 6. In this case, it could be a fumble at the 1-yard line. Like against Oregon, it could be, slipping and falling down on his own for a sack, not getting down on time, to have a play left at the end of the game. You have to, and obviously you couldn't live with those mistakes because you lost that game. But there were a couple in the Nebraska game that really stood out, and now these two in particular against Penn State. But the good news is, he got that out of the way in the first quarter, got the fumble out of the way, and after that, it was all winning time for Will Howard and the Buckeyes. And, he salted away with a couple of runs there to convert third downs on the final drive. He missed a couple of deep balls. One to Carnell Tate, looked like he kind of threw it too far to the outside for Tate to come down with it. And the other one to Jeremiah Smith, that thought might be that Smith may have lost it in the sun or something because it hung up so high in the air. He was wide open behind the defense. The receivers have shown they can get behind the DBs. It's now up to the quarterback to feed them the ball once or twice a game on those deep balls, like he did against Nebraska. They hit the 40 and the 60 against Nebraska, but didn't connect on any of those this week. But I thought his pocket presence is pretty good. He feels the heat, escapes. One of the reporters asked, the play to Jelani Thurman, which was a 4th and 1. I believe it was 4th and 1. And, the going is the guy worded it, going to Jelani Thurman. And I'm like, that play wasn't for Jelani Thurman. What happened, and Coach Day said that basically he was like the third option, out in the left flat. I mean, Howard was supposed to go right, and he got completely, boondoggled at the snap. I think he was under duress, and so he kind of drifts to his left. He's under pressure and just kind of wings it out there for Jelani. As Coach Day said, he was in the side view mirror, type thing. He wasn't where the eyes were focused. He was over here, so got it to him. And as Coach Day also deftly said, he had 3 catches and 3 drops on one play. So congrats to Jelani Thurman, the best catch, or biggest catch, I guess, of his career to convert that 4th down. I think that may have been the drive where Howard ended up fumbling it away anyway. But at any rate, that was kind of a notable play that Howard makes, that he has shown that he's going to keep plays alive and find a way to move the chains. And they were much better on 3rd down in this game. I want to say 5 of 10. Does that sound right, Tony? 5 of 10?
Yeah, something like that.
As opposed to 1 of 10 the week before against Nebraska. You can live with 5 of 10. That's pretty good. And I think they may have converted that 1 4th down, may have been the only one they had. So to me, he did his job. He got the win, which is what it's all about. You'd like to see him eliminate, those 2 detrimental mistakes. Mark and I were talking off the air. He throws the pick 6. That's 7 points that Penn State should not have scored. It was their only touchdown. The Ohio State defense gave up 2 field goals and no touchdowns. So you take 6 off the board for Penn State. They go from 13 down to 6. And if he puts that ball in the end zone at the 1-yard line, that's an extra touchdown for Ohio State. That's 27. They win this game 27-6 if it isn't for those 2 mistakes, although, the game's played a lot differently depending on the score and all those situations as well. But at any rate, I'd give him a B+ on the whole, an A for winning the game, a B+ just on the whole. You can't have those critical mistakes that are going to get you beat. And they did get them beat at Oregon, a couple of the things. But, and of course, the defense was probably more the culprit against Oregon than anything Will Howard did. But defense has played lights out 2 games in a row. So that's been a really great thing to see.
Yeah, with Will, we've said it all season long. It's the 1 or 2 or 3 bad plays that he'd love to have back. And sometimes early in the season, it was just trying to throw one to like Travion Henderson that was maybe a fumble that was just like ill-advised. And then you get to a game like this where there are 2 costly mistakes, but overall he played well enough, and the rest of the team certainly played well enough to get the win. I was just looking back at his stats. So he's accounted for 24 touchdowns this season, and through 8 games last year, Kyle McCord had accounted for just 14. So he's already 10 more than the last year's quarterback. And I went back to see, well, what's that compared to with CJ Stroud in 22? And at this point in 2022, CJ Stroud had accounted for 29 touchdowns. So Howard being 5 touchdowns behind CJ Stroud, I don't think is a damning thing. I think he's doing pretty well, and he's the running that he's doing is helpful. But the 5 interceptions in 6 games, in the past 6 games right now, and it's not like a tipped pass or he's getting hit as he's throwing. Like these are mostly bad interceptions that he shouldn't be throwing. And so eventually you're going to get to the point. They were fortunate that they were able to get a win in this one because of 2 goal line stands, essentially. If they don't get one of those, what happens in this game? So they were able to overcome those mistakes. You're not going to be able to overcome them every single game in the postseason. So you've got to stop them. And as Ryan Day said yesterday, you can't have it. It's unacceptable. Got to work towards eliminating them. And the interception was something that Will Howard, saw improperly or didn't see correctly. And the fumble was just a freak thing, perfectly placed hit by the defender. But you've got to account for that, and you've got to have better security on the ball.
I'm going to go in another direction before we take to the rankings. Caleb Downs was considered one of the best players in the country when they acquired him. And there were a couple times that he showed up on Saturday that I thought, oh yeah, that guy, there he is. But unless you're rewatching these games, which I typically don't, I don't think you pick up on a lot of nuances. At least I don't. So I'm not going to attack his play at all. I guess I'm simply asking if this guy is advertised, is he living up to the hype and the status?
Well, I can tell you the score was 17-10. There was about 5.5 minutes to go in the third quarter. Penn State had 3rd and 9 at the Ohio State 30-yard line. They threw a little pass to the stud, Tyler Warren, in the left flat, and Caleb Downs came up and hit him near the line of scrimmage and held on for dear life and made the open field tackle after like a 2 or 3 yard gain. And instead of that drive converting, I think against most teams on that play, Tyler Warren is going to break that tackle and he's going to plow over somebody for the first down at the 20-yard line, and they're going to continue to march toward the end zone, I think, against 9 teams out of 10. But on that play, Caleb Downs showed, All-American form coming up and making the stop and forced them to kick a field goal. Barker came in, hit a 44-yard field goal. It was 17-13. Penn State never scored again and probably never even threatened. Well, I guess they got to the 1-yard line later on. Yeah, because of Tyler Warren. But, I think that I think he's earning his money. I think there's a thought that Ohio State with Jim Knowles has played him so far off the line of scrimmage that he's not in position a lot of times to make plays. I think on that 4th down play, I could be wrong, but he may have had the receiver's arm or something in the end zone or was kind of shadowing 16, I think, was the intended receiver in the end zone, and he was near him. So, I thought Ransom did a great job on that play, identifying that Warren was slipping out of the backfield in the left flat, and he went and shadowed him. So there was nowhere to go to that had to be the primary, and there was nowhere to go to him. So, Haller just kind of threw it into triple coverage, and his guy couldn't make a play on it. So, I think on the whole, I've kind of wondered at times where Downs has been. I don't think he's ever led him in tackles. If he has, it's only been like once this season. As you look at the stats, which I have this week's release, he is 4th on the team in tackles with 35. So that's not a huge number. He's not going to get anywhere near the 100 or whatever it was he had last year at Alabama. And I got in this argument with some people before the season. He wasn't going to need to have 100 on this defense because he's on a better defense than he was at Alabama last year. So, which, we could debate it all you want, but I mean, they did win the SEC and make the Final Four, but I don't think their defense was necessarily their calling card last season. So, as it had been under the previous, Saban years. But I thought it was kind of a poignant moment that when ESPN Game Day moved inside the stadium, that both McLaughlin and Downs went over, and I don't know, I presume it may have been after the game, maybe it was before the game during warm-ups or whatever, but they both went over and gave Saban a big hug. So I thought that was kind of a cool moment as well.
Yeah, I think I actually wrote about this today about Caleb Downs and his numbers being down, and is he the same player? And a lot of the stuff, like the play against the 4th down play, there's no statistic for that, but it was a great play. So it means nothing in the box score, but if he's not there, then maybe Ohio State loses. And there are other plays like that where he's right where he needs to be. And because he is, the ball can't be there. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Minority Report. Think of it as Caleb Downs is the pre-crime division, making sure that the crime doesn't happen. He's stopping it before it happens on some of those. And so I went back and looked, and at this point last year, through 8 games at Alabama, he had 63 tackles. Now, Alabama, and as Steve said, he's got 35 right now. Alabama also, in 4 of their first 8 games, had given up at least 20 points. So he's out there more. He's had to make more plays. And Ohio State has only given up 20 points once this season. That was the Oregon game. So there are more opportunities. But as Steve said, there are also more defenders on this team. Like that, you're not going to have necessarily the need for him to have those tackles. He is playing a bit. He's still the field safety just as he was at Alabama, but there are 2 different defenses. I also think games are shorter now, so there are fewer plays to be made, as we've seen with the huddling and how that has impacted a possession. It's probably taken a possession away from everybody, so there's opportunities there as well. Nobody is concerned at Ohio State. Nobody is concerned like why isn't Caleb Downs making all these tackles? He had 40 more tackles than anybody else in Alabama's defense last year. That's way too many for a safety. 107 tackles is what it is. You'll have that sometimes. But when you have that many more tackles than anybody else, 1, yeah, you're doing a great job. 2, where is everybody else? And Ohio State has more around them to make those tackles.
We appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We get together every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring 1, 2, or 50 with you next week or for the remainder of this show. If you came in late, of course, back up the discussion, go to the start of the conversation, and watch the entire hour. And again, comments and questions are welcome. Like Yakov, this is going merging industries here. Just me, or does JD Vance look like Merlin Olsen? I don't know if that's for our NFL
I hadn't thought about that,
or a political channel or what that is, but Yakov,
it's topical because he did go to OSU. I guess that's about the only thing you can say there. So
okay, there is a connection. Yes, he did.
There's a slight connection.
I'm not seeing it with Merlin Olsen, but it's probably been 40 years since I saw Merlin Olsen, except for a clip here or there. But yeah, Dick Enberg, Merlin Olsen, of course, after a stellar career with the Los Angeles Rams. So we won't compare careers to this point. The other one kind of just starting in everyone's eyes. Yakov, appreciate you. Thanks for being here. And before we dive into anything else, want to let everyone know that Disputed National Championships is not just a historical book, even though it's a reset of the 1990s and a breakdown of all the storylines and situations each and every season throughout the 90s, what I consider to be the most formative and impactful decade in the history of college football in determining championships and changing the landscape. Mika, thank you so much for purchasing, and thank you so much for the compliments. How long did it take me to write it? The whole project took about 2.5 years, but there were personal issues in there that caused me to push things back and not do anything for quite some time. So I really don't have an answer for that question, but it took enough time. We'll definitely say that. So we appreciate it. The link is in the description section of all the videos. All right.
Yep. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. It was fun to do. I enjoy that kind of stuff. So
What's it like
when
you finally hold your first book in your hands? The physical thing is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Absolutely. You know, before we get to the rankings, Mika and others brought up the defensive line situation. Tyleik Williams had to leave when the ball was inside the 5-yard line, critical situation. Caden McDonald was critical there. Edric Houston played. What do we know about Williams? Mika is also bringing in Jason Moore's name in terms of in the interior defensive front.
Well, Day said that Tyleik is day-to-day, which means they don't need him to play against Purdue, so he probably won't. I wouldn't expect
he could have gone. You were going to get he could have gone.
Just holding him back.
We just thought
keeping him ready for Northwestern, or maybe keeping him ready for Indiana. You know, I think they'd like to maybe have him back for Northwestern just so Indiana isn't his first game, but I'm not expecting to see him this week. He was jogging and walking around after the game, so that's good, certainly. And then in terms of like Jason Moore and Edric Houston, I just wrote about Edric Houston today as well on the move to defensive tackle. As I remember it, when Tyleik Williams went down, Jason Moore was like the first guy out there, and then they replaced him with Edric before maybe the snap. And so they sent him out there instead, which to me, I mean, he's played all of about 11 snaps at defensive tackle the last 2 weeks, and that they're already throwing him out there like this says a lot about him. Maybe also says some things about how they feel about what else they have at the 3-tech position. I know Larry Johnson was very high on Jason Moore in the spring and about what he was doing. He's not played a ton. So there are concerns there, I think, at defensive tackle. However, there have to be concerns about defensive end, because you're going to be losing 5 guys, your top 5 guys in the next 2 seasons, and you have Joshua Mickens to replace them. I mean, they need to do a ton of recruiting, and they need to hit the transfer portal, frankly, for some defensive ends next year as well. But yeah, they really like what they have with Edric Houston. I compared it to like Draymond Jones, who came in as a defensive end, redshirted in 2015 because of a knee injury, and I remember asking Larry Johnson about him at that point, like, what is Draymond Jones going to be next year? And he's like, we'll have to see. Don't know. Have to see what he shows up as once he gets done with the injury. And he was a 280-pound defensive tackle by then, and a freshman All-American as a redshirt freshman. So Edric Houston's probably 272, 275 right now, maybe a little bit heavier as they've been working towards this. And so Larry Johnson loves having that 3-tech that is a former defensive end who can pass rush and get after it. And really, they haven't had one since maybe like Jayshon Cornell and then Draymond Jones before him. And you go back to Adolphus Washington too.
Obviously, Caden McDonald got a lot of credit for this one on the 3rd down play on the goal line. If you watch that, the center snaps the ball and kind of stands up, and that he violated the Cardinals rule there, the low man wins, and Caden McDonald got right up in him and shoved him straight back into the running back, and there was nowhere for the guy to go. I mean, and then the guy, whoever's to the right of Caden McDonald, also kind of caved in that hole, and the runner just kind of ran in there with nowhere to go. And again, thank you, Penn State, for not deviating, for running the same play essentially 3 times in a row, and Ohio State for stuffing it, and then Ohio State for they came out a little bit different set on 4th down and tried to throw it in there, and it didn't work. But Caden McDonald deserves a ton of credit. Hero Canoe was in as a visiting lineman, and then you had Ty Hamilton, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, and the rest, kind of caving that whole thing in. So to me, just an outstanding job by the defensive line.
Folks, we appreciate the Super Chat contributions. Ryan Dawes in particular. Ryan, thank you. Purdue game comment and question. Ideally, the Buckeyes want to be up 28-0 at the half, one offensive drive in the 3rd, and another score, then bring in the second teamers, but maybe leave the quote-unquote starting offensive line in until the 4th quarter.
That is the ideal situation where Ryan Day wants to get his starting quarterback one more possession to end on a good note, and then you bring in the backups, but then allow the backup quarterback to operate with the first team offensive line. It's been a while since we've seen them go deep into the quarterback rotation. You would expect that they'd have an opportunity to do that this week. Maybe we see Julian Sand and Lincoln Keenholz as well. Get to see some James Peoples at running back, and maybe some Mylan Graham at receiver. It'd be an opportunity to see some of these young guys that we haven't gotten to see for a while because the games have been close and the games have also been big.
Yeah, this is an opportunity for some guys who are under that 4-game restriction to redshirt to get in there and play. Obviously, you wouldn't see them next week at Northwestern because that'll be restricted to 70, 74 players, whatever it is for the travel. But you'd have the whole roster available this week. So anybody who's not played those 4 games yet, you would maybe try and get them in there. And to my understanding, I don't think the 4 games is going to count for any of the postseason this year. So yeah, so guys could play 7 games and still redshirt, but whatever. So great question, Ryan. I agree 100% with what you're thinking. Oregon beat this team 35-0 at Purdue. They lost the game to Illinois 50-49 in overtime. They lost this past week to Northwestern 26-20 in overtime. I think they scored 49 points in that loss to Illinois and maybe have 34 combined in their other 4 Big Ten games. So it's kind of been feast or famine for Purdue's offense. And I know that Coach Day said both the quarterbacks, Hudson Card and I think Broom is the other one, have done a bang-up job, for Purdue in spite of how bad the season has gone, 1-7. And they were predicted 18th in the Big Ten, and looks like they will indeed fulfill that prophecy. It was noted that Indiana was picked 17th, and they're going to far exceed expectations, it seems, this year. So we'll get on to Indiana in a few weeks. I had an interesting thing I tweeted out last night that I went through now that we know the TV assignments for just about every week except week 13 in the Big Ten. And I did my own draft, 1, 2, 3 of every week by NBC, CBS, and Fox. Right down the side here, I did my own draft. And so far, out of the 13 weeks that we know, Fox had the first pick 6 times. NBC had it 4 times, it seems, and CBS only 3 times. So it makes perfect sense in my world that week 13, CBS would have the first pick, and it would be Ohio State versus Indiana at 3:30 on CBS. Is with 99% of precincts reporting, that is my projection for the announcement. And hopefully we'll get it as early as Monday of next week so people can make the proper planning. But that is the setting that game needs, kind of slowly fading into darkness, and the Buckeyes sending the Hoosiers off into the night with their first loss of the season.
Yeah, I was thinking
first game against a competitive team this season as well.
I was also thinking like that probably isn't a Fox game because there's nothing that week that Fox would take that week as the week they wanted to have the first pick. So it makes sense that it would end up with CBS or NBC. Now, NBC does have a night game that week with Notre Dame and Army. So I don't know if they will then have a 3:30 game and then CBS goes to 7:30. I don't know if they'll want to have, so we don't know the ins and outs of that.
Hey,
one
that
yet.
would work too. If they want to finagle that, that would work too. 3:30 or 7:30. You know, I get in these arguments with people. A lot of it's for fun about the TV situation and, all the noon games, and people hate those and whatever. I'm like, I love it because I'm in my car at 6:30 p.m. and I'm heading home. The TV people hate it because they have to get up and be at the stadium at 9:30 to get set up. And they still have to do the 11 p.m. news 15 hours later, so they have a 15-hour day on those noon game Saturdays. For me, I punch out at 6:30. I may go home and piddle around on my photos or whatever while I'm watching the late game, but it's, with a coldie, right here, so that's not such a problem. Chicago next week, it'll be 11 a.m. local. So I'll be done at 5:30 local time, and we're not flying home till Sunday. So it's like, man, that's going to be a lot of fun in Chicago on Saturday after a 44-5 Ohio State win over Northwestern. But then 3:30, fans are like, well, the noon games, the kids can't get there from out of state. The great recruits can't get there. We lose out on all these out-of-state kids. I'm like, yeah, all the noon starts have just killed Ohio State's recruiting, to play Penn State at home at noon and to play Michigan at home at noon every year. They always end up with the number 2 recruiting class and 4 or 5 5-stars. It's just murdered the recruiting. It's massacred it. Imagine how great the recruiting. They might finish with the number 2 class some year if they had 3:30 and 7:30 games every week. Oh my God. That's my little tweak out there to all the people who, again, I'm selfish. I want to be done at 6:30 p.m., but whatever.
I know Penn State fans hate big noon kickoff because it has robbed them of a whiteout against Ohio State the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, now they get a whiteout this week for a meaningless Washington game. Penn State 37, Washington 11 is going to be the final score of that game. Jesus criminy.
So I think there are even shirts printed up saying F big noon in so many words, and they hate it. And
the game drew almost 10 million viewers, which is Fox's biggest broadcast of the year, I think. So, it worked out for Fox.
But don't let Ohio State close out on like 5 straight noon games. I mean, that's – come on. Let somebody else carry the water a little bit around here.
Yeah.
Our buddy Jackson is everywhere. Appreciate you being here, Jackson, of course. Jackson all over our social media, in our chats, promoting the voice of college football. Tell your friends, your family, the cashier at Kroger about the magic we're producing here, guys. Mark, Steve, and Tony bring every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time on the Ohio State voice of college football.
Do people still go through the aisles with actual cashiers?
There are some aisles at Kroger that still have cashiers, yes.
I just talk to a machine is what I do.
Yeah.
And now you can just talk to, if you got those carts now that you can just purchase things in the cart and take the cart out to the car, you don't have to talk to anybody. So don't do that. Talk to people about the show.
There are people out there that you can still talk to. They may not respond. I find that in the stores as well. Like if people like set up their carts and they're like 4 feet from the product and they just kind of park and block the way, and there's no reason for them to do that. And I doesn't bother me. I can say, excuse me, but people don't respond. They just, generally that's maybe I'm just not a person that gets responded to. I don't know.
I don't have any problem with a little side swiping of carts. Like if you're taking too much room, I'm going to let you know about it. It's the same way in traffic. I don't care.
Yes. I do that as well. If I can make it as close as possible and send a message that you need to, be observant of the space here and the unwritten rules of space in the aisles or in a lane, you need to be understanding of that. Yes.
We're supposed to be a proper country. Come on.
I took off on a green light the other day and somebody ran a green arrow by I don't know how long. Now, I could have just slowed through, sat there through the intersection, kind of crawled, but I gave it a good, to, miss their back bumper by about 3 inches just to send a message. Got to do that. It's done on the football field. Why not elsewhere? All right. Steve alluded to the rankings. I would have been okay with number 3. I would have understood that. I do believe that Ohio State belongs at number 2, especially when you extend that out to the Texas connection. Texas being Georgia's best win and most dominant win. Yes, they were more dominant in that game. However, Georgia has not been as consistent as Ohio State, Nebraska notwithstanding, and Texas really doesn't have much of a resume. I don't know that Penn State should not be higher than Texas, so I'll leave it, Tony, to you first in regards to, and folks, we did a watch party last night. We went through every conference, every contender in every conference, their schedules, what the ranking looks like, what it should be if it's off, which I didn't have a big issue with much. And then it's always fun to go way down the rankings and find that team that's got a path, or those 2 or 3 teams that have paths that are buried in the rankings.
One of my main takeaways is that if Army or Boise State doesn't come out of this thing, you're looking at teams that you're not even thinking about right now, whether it's a Tulane or a Memphis or something like that, where we've already decided it's going to be Boise State. And if it's not them, then it'll be Army. But there's no guarantee that it's going to be one of those 2. And you're talking about, if it's not, then it's going to be a 2 or 3 loss team from some other, from the AAC or the Mountain West, probably not the Sun Belt or MAC or Conference USA. But there may be teams that we're not even talking about at this point that get in there. And frankly, that's probably how it's going to be throughout this thing, because you're going to have somebody rise up, whether, even with the Power 4, whether it's like a Colorado winning the Big 12 or something like that, because, who knows who's going to come out of that. Is BYU going to hold on? I don't know. But it is going to be fun to watch all of this stuff. And you've got a playoff elimination game this week between Alabama and LSU. So somebody's going to get their 3rd loss and drop out. But I was a little surprised that they went with Ohio State too, although, they went with Ohio State 1 last year in the initial ranking. So they did like they also mentioned in that teleconference, they liked how Ohio State's rebuilt offensive line was able to handle themselves at Penn State. So that was something else that they liked. And of course, the offensive struggles with Georgia was a factor as well.
Yeah, Georgia loses, to Alabama, did beat Texas, I guess. So Ohio State loses to Oregon and does go to Penn State and wins a game. And Georgia, as they put it up there, had the number 1 strength of schedule, which is kind of interesting that you downrate the team with the number 1 strength of schedule. Ohio State's schedule was 19th, so it's very respectable as well. And I think if you're within 20 spots on strength of schedule, I think it means it's pretty comparable. I mean, you there's no comparison. You're like 58th in strength of schedule against number 1 or number 15 or whatever. But Indiana, I think their schedule is down in the close to 100. And people are arguing, well, if they had a blue bud name, they'd be up at the top. And I'm like, I don't think they certainly haven't beaten anybody in the committee's top 25, and may not, if the committee stretched it out to 50, may not have beaten anybody in the top 50 unless you want to, generously put Nebraska in the top 50. I don't even know what Indiana's signature win is. I guess on game day it was Nebraska, but otherwise, I mean, who has Indiana beaten that is, respectable in any way, shape, or form? I mean, they're going to play Michigan this week, and what are they now? 5-3, maybe. I don't even know what they are.
5-4.
5-4. Yeah, going to be 5-5 after this week, I think. So, I think Indiana's offense, as great as the Michigan defense might be. I mean, Oregon showed what a great offense can do against that great defense. So, Michigan's not going to move the football. So, that fourth down play where they ran the double reverse to Samaj Morgan and he just tries to throw it up for somebody. And like, you have a perfectly well-trained thrower right here in the Warren kid. Why didn't you let him throw it? It's like if you were going to throw the football, I mean, and you punch it in there, it's a one touchdown game. I mean, it's anybody's game. If you punch it in there and they ran some kind of gimmicky gadget, thing that might work 2 times out of 10, maybe once out of 10, didn't work out for them. So I guess there's a reason, but yeah, the rankings seem pretty straightforward to me. The only deviation from the AP was Ohio State and Georgia. Everything else, I think, as you can see it on the screen, is pretty much verbatim all the way down to Alabama there. I was debating with Ari Wasserman on Twitter. You go below Miami, draw a line at Miami, number 4, Texas all the way down to Alabama. All those teams, 5 down to 11. Honestly, it's all apples to oranges. Who's played who? I mean, there's very few head-to-head matchups within that little subset of teams to where you say, oh, this team is clearly better than that one. They beat them on the field. It really hasn't happened much, if at all, yet. And I mean, I know Tennessee and Alabama, do they play or have they already played or what?
Tennessee beat Alabama.
Tennessee beat Alabama. Okay, so then that's a clear one. That may be the only head-to-head, but my argument was you could put that subset of 5 to 11 in a fishbowl and just draw them out in any order, and you could justify it any way you want. So, I mean, I know BYU's undefeated, but kind of along the lines of Indiana, it's kind of like, okay, you beat SMU and, you beat some teams that people thought were going to be pretty good, like Kansas and, some other teams, but, haven't turned out to be very good. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
With Indiana in the helmets, I will say Michigan was ranked number 1 in the AP last year, playing the same schedule as Indiana this year. And the same kind of domination on both sides of the ball. However, Michigan was number 3 in the initial college football rankings. So the committee at least took some of that into account and looked at who they had played and not played, whereas Indiana has just not gotten, they've had to come up from the bottom. And if they had started in the top 10, they'd be, right there with Miami or Texas right now, probably. But since they've had to start so low, and the other thing is like anymore, if they're good enough, they're going to get to the point anyway. They're in the playoffs at this point. They're going to play Ohio State. If they lose to Ohio State and they finish 11-1, they're in. So it's hard to get too upset about these rankings because there's going to be room for the teams that deserve it.
What's remarkable about Indiana is that if you would have told me they would be 9-0 at this point, I would have been surprised, number 1. Number 2, that they've had game control throughout. They're the only team in the Big Ten, maybe the only team in the nation. Yeah, BYU's struggled past the likes of Oklahoma State. So maybe the only team in the nation that has had game control consistently. And I'm not talking technically, yes, against Michigan State, they trailed 10-0, but they blew them out. They have controlled or dominated every game. And that's just, if you would have told me 9-0 for Indiana, I would have been thinking a lot of 31-28 games to get them to this point. But they have been rather impressive. And yes, to Steve's point, it's Nebraska and Washington at 5-4 as their best wins. So there's not much on the bone at this point, but they will get their chance. But with what they've had in front of them, it's been really impressive. Mm-hmm. And what would suck, though, Tony, about the 8-9 situation, and maybe even the 7-10 will be close to inseparable, is obviously having to play that road game. So as it matches up right now, going to Knoxville to play instead of being at Bloomington could be huge.
Yeah, my hope is that eventually it falls that Notre Dame has to play at Bloomington in the first round. I think that would be fantastic for Indiana fans and for anybody who enjoys college football to watch that and see Memorial Stadium and those fans be rewarded for an incredible season so far. But yeah, I would to have one loss and then not to get to host a game, they have one opportunity to beat somebody, and if they don't do it, then I guess you can't get too upset. But hey, if you would have told them 3 months ago, hey, you'll be in the playoffs, do you care where? They would have said, no, we don't care, just let us in. So
8 teams in the SEC have 1 or 2 losses. Now, do I expect Missouri to stay with 2 losses? Well, they do play a pretty lousy schedule for an SEC schedule, so who knows? But that's kind of fascinating, the way the SEC is all bunched up together. They don't have that Big Ten 0-1 loss. Nobody's got 2 losses, and then you drop down, and if you got 3 losses, forget it, you're done. It's just so clear in the Big Ten. The SEC is the opposite.
3 losses is not necessarily the death knell. I told you guys a while back, I did that survey from the BCS in 98 up through last year, and almost an average of 1 team a year would have made it. In some years, 3 or even 4 3-loss teams would have made a 12-team playoff. So I think the best of the 3-loss teams could be considered, but they got to have some quality wins on that resume to get in over a 2-loss team, certainly.
But it's 0 or maybe 1 team during the 4-team era when we had actual playoff rankings, correct?
Well, I used...
If you go by the playoff rankings starting in 2014, I think that I go back and forth on this, because there's a year that Penn State was 9-3, and I thought they were number 11 in the country at the end of the regular season. But then I checked a couple of days ago, and they were like number 13. So I don't know what I missed there.
No, I have to get all that out. But though there were quite a few instances where 3-loss teams were in the top 11. So, which, you got to be in the top 11 to assure yourself, because 12 is probably the group of 5. So, as it would be, I saw the one scenario, Ohio State, if they're the 5 seed and don't win the Big Ten, which with a second loss, do they even keep the 5 seed? I don't know. That's interesting. Do you freeze them at the end of the regular season and say, okay, they were this, and then they lost to the number 1 team in the Big Ten championship game? Theoretically, I mean, Ohio State could easily go out there to Indianapolis and avenge that loss and beat Oregon and get into the top 4. But in the seeding, 5, they would host Boise State, and then they would play BYU, would be like their next team up after that. So that's a pretty favorable, because BYU would be the 4 seed as the Big 12 champion. That's a pretty favorable route to the semifinals, I would think.
Yeah, you might see the loser of the Big Ten championship game as that, whoever it is, if it would be Oregon and Ohio State, whoever that is probably that 5.
Yeah,
given the nature.
You can't penalize them. I mean, they're better than whoever else is out there.
You can penalize them according to the committee if the loss is bad. So don't get blown out, and then they won't, as they say, we won't unduly punish you.
Don't go out there and show you're not capable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for coming back. Appreciate the contribution. How ironic are the college football playoff rankings? I know it is only the first ranking, but there are some different names in the top 12 than years past.
Miami, where you been? We missed you. And Indiana and BYU.
But even SMU is right there, waiting in the wings to win the ACC, beat Miami, and jump in there. And that would not be great for the other conferences who are, maybe the SEC and the Big Ten, who are trying to get 4 teams each. If SMU goes in there and beats Miami, and then Miami is at 12, 12-1, I don't know that you can keep them out of the playoffs. So that takes a spot away from perhaps a 2-loss, 3-loss SEC team, if there is one, because we know the highest ranked 3-loss team is going to come from the SEC, because that's just how it always is. The highest ranked 2-loss team is from the SEC. We saw with Alabama right now. And so, say LSU wins that game this week, they'll just move right to where Alabama is and be that highest ranked 2-loss team probably. But the SEC and the Big Ten are not looking forward to SMU possibly coming out of there. They're just rooting for Miami to continue to win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would love to see chaos. In the Big 12, of course, you had Iowa State losing their first game. They dropped to 17, but they still control their own destiny all the way through. And you've got Colorado with only one conference loss. Therefore, they're lined up to have some kind of tiebreaker with Iowa State to meet BYU in the conference championship game. And now if some two-loss team jumps up and beats one of those two, meaning Colorado or Iowa State, then it becomes all sorts of a free-for-all mess. You involve Cincinnati and all sorts of
and because Colorado, they don't play either BYU or Iowa State, so it's not going to be settled in on the field in that one. So that's going to be interesting to see how that tiebreaker breaks out. Whether I don't know if it's overall record at some point or what. It's usually record against common opponents and things like that.
Great stuff. Tony, what's going on this week at Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly?
Well, just posted a couple of stories today, one on the Caleb Downs thing, as I mentioned earlier, and then another on Edric Houston and the move to defensive tackle. Dropped a new episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast, which was just our live watch along of the playoff rankings. So you can find that at buckeyehuddle.com, or you can, of course, find the podcast wherever your podcasts are sold. We dropped another one the day before that about what we learned rewatching Ohio State's win over Penn State. Stuff that we can only see on the TV broadcast because things are moving quickly in the press box and on the field, so we don't always get to see everything as it happens. So we like to go back and take a look.
Steve.
Just keeping busy. We'll have a few players and Coach Day after practice today to give a midweek update. OSU basketball had a surprising result Monday night, knocked off Texas 80-72 in their opener. They're back in action Monday against Youngstown State, so that was good. And the women, Jelani Cambridge, top 3 prospect in the country, debuted last night, had a huge game in their opening win last night. So a lot of stuff going on at Ohio State. In addition to football, it's that busy time of the year where we have this overlap. And certainly Purdue at home this week, Ohio State 38.5-point favorite to beat, or at least that's what it was. It might be even more now, to beat Purdue. And then next week, looking forward to going to Wrigley Field and Ohio State versus Northwestern, seeing 40,000 strong of Buckeye Nation take over Wrigleyville for the day. That should be a lot of fun. And then the big one, and I don't mean Michigan, the big one with Indiana, which Indiana plays Michigan this week. If they win that game, they are off, I believe, the following week, because that'll get them to 10-0. I think they're idle going into the Ohio State game the following week. And that'll be the one that will determine, I suppose, which of those teams would go to Indianapolis. So, big one there. And then obviously Michigan at the end, could be a fun day at the Horseshoe. So it's all out there in front of Ohio State. 4 games left to play in the regular season. As the guys have said here this week, the Penn State, I said this on our post-game show after the game at Penn State, that can't be the high water mark for the season. That has to be an accomplishment that gives them confidence to go to even greater heights, because they're going to play much better teams than Penn State. Penn State offensively just did not have it in that game. And again, a lot of that was Ohio State's defense didn't allow them to establish the run. It didn't give Aller the time to pick them apart as he has some other teams this year. So to my way of thinking, go back to 2014, they went on the road. They won double overtime at Penn State. They went on the road, won that big one at Michigan State. The 10-year anniversary of that game comes up tomorrow, I believe. They went into the no-fly zone, and Evan Spencer tweeted out after the game as they were headed to the flight, we'll fly wherever the hell we want. So I think 49-37, great win at Michigan State. Those are examples of great regular season wins, but then it got even better with Wisconsin, Alabama, and Oregon after that. And that's what we need to see out of this team. They can't go Penn State, Northwestern, or rather Purdue, Northwestern, and expect to come back up here for Indiana. It does not work that way. So they need to stay at this level and keep climbing.
If Indiana wins that game, I believe it will come down to Penn State, Indiana, and best opponent's winning percentage in the Big Ten. I
Yeah,
think that's what we're looking at there.
could be.
All
Yeah,
right,
because
folks,
State
appreciate
would
you.
have 2 losses. Yeah.
Yep. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Tony, thank you. Steve, thank you. We will be back here next Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. See you then.